What's going on, my planting people? My name is Lithius and welcome to Roots Ready. This year, I think I've walked you through my succulent and cacti collection, my philodendron and my anthurium collection. The one that slipped my mind accidentally was my Monstera collection. The reason for that is because it's not the largest collection in the world, but boy, do I have some stunners in the collection. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving you a quick whistle-stop tour of my entire Monstera collection. Strap in because it's going to be an interesting one. The very first plant that I want to talk about today is probably my most impressive Monstera, or the one that I think is the most impressive anyway. And that is none other than this, my Monstera Constellation. This is an absolutely stunning plant, and to be honest, it's a plant that I've wanted in my collection for a very long time, and I managed to bag this one a couple of years ago. And me and this plant, we've had quite a turbulent relationship in that time. I've nearly lost this plant and it actually died all the way back to a small node, and since then I was able to revive it and bring it back to this, and this is the best that this plant has looked since I've had it in my collection, and I'm really proud of it. One, just because of how stunning it is and how nicely it seems to be growing at the moment, and two, just because of how far this plant has come. I'm really impressed with its growth. This right here is the latest leaf, and look at the number of fenestrations we have on here. It's looking really nice, really nice. This is the leaf before, which seems to be a lot bigger, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. No, I do think I know why this is. So this plant was originally sitting here right next to my east facing window, and that was it, and I didn't really do much with it. It's still sitting here, but it's pushed back further, so it's getting less of that natural light and more of the grow light. So it's right underneath a grow light, and I think that's why the plant is taking a bit of time to acclimate towards that light, and since then this is the leaf that it has produced. Other things that I've done with this plant since the last time you've probably seen it on my channel is I've included this little pot here just to extend that growing medium a bit higher up on the surface, and that would mean that the plant will be able to root a bit more and have a bit more of a stable base, and hopefully prevent any more of that root rot happening. So if anything happens, hopefully I have a bit more root surface to work with. I don't think I'm going to extend this any higher, because then what you run the risk of is stem rot, and that's another thing that you don't want, and that one is probably arguably a little bit harder to work with, because if it's rotted from the stem, that's a lot more harder to work with, because you need to chop off actual stem, actual growing material, whereas when it's the roots, you can cut off as many of the roots as possible, and hopefully it roots a lot easier with just what's left. Since I've added this little extension, I must say I can see some really good roots. I'm going to try to show it to you. Some of them it's hard to see just because of the kind of the soil, but from here you can see we've got these two root ends, but this is part of a much larger root. We have a nice long big root running all the way down here, and it's actually growing into the soil. We have some more over here and over here as well, so it's safe to say that this is growing really nicely. Now in this extension, what I've done is I've created a slightly separate, different kind of root medium here. Whereas this one was mainly soil, cocoa fiber and other bits and pieces, the top here is predominantly tree fern fiber, because I've heard very good things about it, and this was a way of experimenting with that. In my next video, I'm actually going to give you a bit of an update of this rooting medium, because I've actually trialed it on this plant and two others, and I'm going to go a bit more in depth in terms of what my experience is with this medium. Is it worth having, or is it not? Is it just a gimmick? But that's more to come. I'm going to go a lot more in detail with this. But for the very first plant, my very first Monstera that I'm going to talk about today is this one, the Monstera Constellation. Probably the most recognizable Monstera is this one right here. This is just the regular Monstera Deliciosa. This is, I believe, the Borsigiana form. I'm sure I've butchered that name, but it is the smaller leaf variety. You have the other one, which is the probably the more iconic one, which has the massive, huge leaves on them. And then you've got this one, very similar, but the leaves just stay a lot smaller. Now, this is just a propagation one. In my previous video, I gave you an update on this because my larger one was growing so big and so large that I had to chop it down. And I'm so glad that I did that, because that thing was becoming completely unruly and growing out of control. Go check out my recent video about this plant and I'll give you a full update on where this plant came from and how it's doing now. But to summarize, this is a very, very strong plant, very good grower, very easy to propagate. And that's what that video shows you, is my two methods that I used. And I go through which one I feel is better for this plant, which one's easier. But for now, this is it. This is the Monstera Deliciosa, just a gorgeous plant. I want to say that this is probably my very first Monstera that I've ever had. And this one, interestingly enough, I actually purchased it off of Amazon. I don't think I've purchased another plant since. It was only this one and my fiddle leaf fig over here. Those were the only two plants I've ever bought off of Amazon. Everything else has come from trades or from eBay, from other local sellers and so on. But yes, this plant is just a staple. I think if you're gonna get into the world of plant collecting, or you want to get some more tropical plants in your space, this is a great plant to start with because it's easy to care for. You won't have as much of a headache as you have with the Thai Constellation, which is prone to root rot. This thing is almost bulletproof, so you won't have those issues. So a plant that I would recommend if you want it in your space. Unlike the other Monsteras that I've showed you so far that are doing really, really well and I'm really proud of, this one, not so much. This is my Monstera Adansonii, and this thing has seen better days. I don't know what's up with this plant. Just lately, it keeps dropping all of its leaves. This was super, super bushy, incredibly bushy. It had so many leaves on it. And I moved the plant from one side of a window, east-facing window upstairs, to the other side of the window. And since then, the plant has just completely hated me for it. It has dropped almost, I want to say maybe 90% of its leaves, because this was super, super, super bushy. It was a really strong grower, very regular, and a lot like my Monstera Deliciosa, the regular form, it was almost bulletproof until I moved it a couple of feet in another direction. And it's completely just, I don't know, it's just kicking up a fuss. Look at that. This is mostly vine. Mostly vine. And before this video, I actually went ahead and I took it off of this pole and I had to rewind it around this thing just so that I could clean it up a little bit. I just don't know. I just don't know what else to do with this plant. To be fair, this is a plant that I've never been super sold on the Adansonii for whatever reason. It's a cool plant. It looks okay. But I don't know. It doesn't scream, you know, for me anyway, that it needs to be in my collection. I found it on a really good bargain. I think it was about £2 or something like that. And I thought, you know what? It's another one of those common plants that a lot of people have. Let me try it. Let me try to grow it. It did so well for so long. And then all of a sudden, in the last couple of months, it's just gone downhill. Now, I'm not going to try to rush to save this plant. It's okay. But honestly, if it goes, so be it. That's just how it goes sometimes. But I'm going to just keep an eye on it, see if I can get it to revive and bounce back and hopefully produce some nice leaves for me. But honestly, I'm not going to hold my breath. I really am not. It is very, very long. I would say this thing is probably, the vines are probably about 3 meters long, so very, very long. So you can see there was a lot of growth on this thing. However, as soon as I moved it, it's just gone downhill. So we'll see what happens with this plant, if I'm able to revive it, or if it's going to be one of those plants that ends up on the compost pile. We'll see. We'll see. But yes, the Monstera Adansonii, just a disappointing one for me. I must admit, very, very disappointing. So from the worst performing Monstera in my collection to one of the ones that I'm really proud of is this one. It's still small, but damn, I'm so happy with this. I was away from my plants for about a week or so, and I came back to this lovely little surprise, this new leaf that started to emerge. Now, this is my Monstera Bowmark Flame. It is one of the newest plants in my collection. I recently purchased this plant maybe a couple of months ago. I can't quite remember exactly when I got it, but probably at the tail end of summer. And for the most part, this plant has only had these 2 leaves. Now, in my experience, Monsteras tend to grow quite quickly, quite nicely, quite rapidly, especially when the weather's right, when it's still warm. I had this plant in my grow tent, high humidity, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. This plant just refused to budge. And so I just left it. I just thought, okay, this is probably one of the slower growing Monsteras out there. It's new to me. I've never grown a Belmark flame before. So I just sort of forgot it. Now, before I went away, I went ahead and I repotted this plant into some tree fern fiber. And I also took it out of my grow tent, super high humidity, and I placed it here on the top shelf. So under the light, right next to the Spiritus Sancti, under the right, decent light. So it's not loads. This is probably about a 20 centimeter, 30 centimeter away from it. Much lower humidity level. So whereas my grow tent is about 80 to 90%, 100% if I've just watered, and it's in the nighttime, the lights are off. Here, the humidity is around 60 to 70%. So it's a little bit lower, and it can drop a lot lower than that, especially if the heating comes on as well. So I didn't expect this plant to start doing anything for me, but then lo and behold, I've come back and I've got this new leaf that is coming in, and it's coming in nice and strong. Look at that. It looks like it's going to be a decent sized leaf as well. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that this plant continues to grow and I can very quickly have something that is really, really impressive. So we're going to keep an eye on this one and see how it does. The Monstera Belmark flame, really, really cute. I really do like these long slender leaves, but I know that's not going to last forever, so I'll enjoy it whilst I can. The final plant I'm going to talk about is probably my most impressive Monstera, I would want to say. It certainly is a really nice one that honestly doesn't cause me any headache, any fuss, nothing at all. It is just a plant that I set and forget. That's one of my philosophies with plant growth. Any plant that allows me to just have it in the corner and forget about it and it just does its thing is a plant that I want in my collection. And this plant certainly is that. And it is none other than this one. This is my Monstera Peru, an absolute beast of a plant. Look at that. Let me see. I'm going to try to lift it up as high as possible without hitting the ceiling. But this thing is absolutely huge. And honestly, as I said, it is a plant that doesn't cause me any headache. It is just a lovely, easy grower once you get it started. My only reservation about this plant is that it's super hard to root it. So if you were to take a cutting of this plant and try to root it in sphagnum moss, in something in water, it is one of the more difficult plants to do so. I've tried it and I've only been able to propagate just one plant, one cutting out of this thing. Luckily, when I bought it, it was already rooted. Not very well rooted though. Some of the vines actually had no roots in them. So maybe I was lucky with that. But since then, this thing has been just an absolute trooper, just pushing out leaves left, right, and center. And I couldn't be more proud of this plant. What I really love about this plant is just the texture on the leaves. Check that out. Just lovely belate leaves, nice dark crevices, and it just looks really, really special, really prehistoric as well. You will notice though that one of the leaves looks slightly different. That's because I stuck a Cebu blue in here as well, just because I had nowhere else to put it and I knew I wanted it on a moss pole or a pole like this. So there's two plants growing in here and that's actually doing really, really well actually. Started off as just a single cutting and look at it now. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the Monstera Peru, which is doing super, super well. What I like about this plant as well, a lot like the Monstera Deliciosa actually, is that it really holds onto its leaves. So it's not one of those plants that produces a leaf and then the leaf falls off in a couple of months. Some of these leaves have been on here for years and I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. Honestly, this plant has some real holding power and that's something that I really like because it grows new leaves. I must admit the leaves at the top are a lot smaller than the ones down here, but I know it's not going to go anywhere. I can just wrap these plants around this thing and the longer I have this plant, the more dense it becomes. Really, really proud of this plant and how well it is doing. The Monstera Peru. Absolutely gorgeous. Wow. So as I said at the start, it's not the biggest collection in the world, but it's certainly my little precious collection. I am happy with the Monsteras that I have, and all of them seem to be doing just fine, all apart from the Monstera Adansonii down there. I'm looking at it now and it's just, yeah, anyway, it was, if I look at it in the grand scheme of things, it was a £2 plant. I'm quite impressed with how large I was able to grow it. It's just a shame that for whatever reason, it started to go downhill. If you have any tips on how I can improve it, let me know in the comments below. I would love to discuss it there. Let me know in the comments below what your Monstera collection is like. Is it like mine where it's kind of small? Or are you on the larger side of it? Let me know your tips and tricks. But that's all. Thank you for watching. And as always, keep planting.